Pretty good, eh? I am definitely trying this one on. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can copy your favourite skirts and make a pattern out of them. When you make a pattern of something, you need to make it as flat as possible. Now I know that this skirt is symmetrical, so I'm going to fold it over and I'm going to try and make it as flat as possible. So this will be the bottom piece. Then I lay it on some paper and add seam allowance. Now I know that it's going to be on a fold, so I fold some paper, I put the centre on a fold, I push out the curve, and then I just draw around with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now what's very important is for your hem, because it's coming in at an angle, you need to come out at an angle for the hem, so when you hem it, the hem fits. Remember to make patterns out of existing clothing. It's so easy. If you can lay it flat, it's fine. So now we're going to deal with the top part of the skirt. So to make the pattern from the top part of the skirt, again, I folded it in half, and then I'm forcing it to the area that I want, which is this area up here at the top. I'm going to fold in those bits that I don't want and then lay it on the paper to a fold, so that's to a fold, and I've added a seam allowance and a little bit extra for the waist where the elastic has an elasticated waist, so I know that I need a bit extra to gather in. Now very often when you do try to make patterns from your existing clothing, things are not completely symmetrical, so always check that they're symmetrical and that your top and your bottom lines up. So this is the bottom of my sculptural skirt, this is the top of the sculptural skirt, the elastic will go into here, I've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance for the side seams, 1/2 centimetre for the top where it gets attached onto the elastic, and I've got a 2 centimetre seam allowance for the hem. Now we want to make sure that it all lines up, so what I recommend doing, because we're pinless at stitchless, is to create notches. Definitely a notch for the centre at the top waist and where the bottom and the top join on the skirt, and then go around, create another notch, another notch, another notch, and keep working your way round, turning it like a wheel until you get to the edge, because you might find it a bit longer or shorter and you'll need to make an adjustment. Then all we have to do is just cut it out. Now I recommend using sort of a neoprene type fabric, or maybe a fine cotton if you want it as a kind of summer skirt. But there's something that you need to put also in your sculptural skirt to make it stand out a little bit. And here Jenny Brewster's used a fake leather, but you could use some ribbon or some braiding. So I've cut out my front and back of this part of the skirt, and I've cut the front and back of that part of the skirt. If you haven't forgotten to do your little notch that shows the centre on the waist and then the centre on the middle of the skirt, because that is important. Now, keep them in this position and just mark the side that we're going to stitch up, because believe me, it's so easy to get confused. So just with this chalk, I'm just marking the sides that I'm going to stitch up. So we're going to stitch up the side seam on the top of the skirt and the side seam, following that shape, on the bottom of the skirt. Using a straight stitch, we're sewing the side seam on the top at the moment, and we're going to use a straight stitch and a centimetre seam allowance, and we're going to go forwards and backwards a couple of times to close off the seam, centimetre seam allowance, and then when we get to the end of the seam, we're going to go backwards and forwards there. Now because I'm using this neoprene today, the great thing about neoprene is that you don't really need to finish off the edges because it doesn't fray. So I do exactly the same now with the bottom piece. Now when we get to the little bit on the hem where it comes out, line up your needle with where the V goes in, lift the foot, turn it, put the foot back down and go to the end, backwards and forwards. Now you know how I am about pressing, even though it's neoprene, I'm going to give it a quick press because it is the difference between looking professional and not. So I've pressed the seam outwards on both of them. Now for the hem, where we've got our funny little V bit, just give it a little snip with a pair of scissors that work so that it opens out a bit, and then you can press it open more easily. Do you remember me saying that I was going to use like a strip of leather or ribbon or something to join them both together? Well, we're going to use this fake leather today. We're going to start on the bottom, and I'm going to put it right sides together with a little overhang, and I'm going to sew it 1/2 centimetre away from the edge, and I'm just going to keep going all the way round. Now as you sew it, do not stretch, no stretching, you're just feed. Look, I've got no pins, nothing, I'm just feeding the fabric underneath the foot. And is it fine? Yeah, it's fine. So it's a 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. Now when you run out of leather, don't do anything fancy. All you have to do is this. So this is my leather, I've run out. I'm simply going to do a slight overlap like that. So here's that piece. I'm not doing anything fancy, I'm just laying it on top of the other strip of leather, and I'm just going to keep sewing, and it will just end up being trapped in there. Why make it any more complicated than that? So we end up with this piece attached. Now, when you cut off the end of it, don't cut it like that. We need a little bit extra because we don't know the angle at which it's going to feed into the bottom. So this is the moment where we attach the top to the bottom. Now, I want you to start at that side seam. So I want you to line up the side seam of the top with the side seam of the bottom. Right sides together. It's just, it will be easier to manage doing it this way, believe me. And I'm going to slowly start feeding my way down that side, and then we'll do the other side. The reason why we start at the side is that it will be easier to make everything fit. Whereas if you started from the other side, by the time you get round to this side, there could be more of a discrepancy. So you see, by starting at the side seam and then coming out, look how there's only like a little bit of difference, which I can sort of ease in. So look at that, that's what we've got so far. Pretty stylish. So we're going to do the same now on the other side. So we start at that side seam and we just work our way round on the other side. So I've done both sides now of my sculptural skirt, the front and the back, although they're both the same. Now I've got to do something that I'm really nervous about. I've got to press this fake leather stuff, and I'm so worried that it's going to melt. So I'm going to use it on, I'm going to use the iron at a medium to low setting, and I'll let you know how I get on. So what I'm doing is I'm folding in those seams. Okay, so I fold them in, pull out the fabric, fold them in, and then I press it. And use lots of steam because it definitely helps it. So now I'm going to show you how to stitch this elastic onto your skirt using a twin needle. Now if you have a look at the elastic on the Jenny Brewster skirt, it lays on top of the fabric. And we use a twin needle because underneath it does a zigzag, so it makes the stitch line stretch. Now if you want to know how to change your needle for a twin needle or change your needle on a machine, I have got a video on my Stitches TV channel, how to change a needle and how to use a twin needle. So the first thing you need to do with your elastic is just see how big you want it to be. I quite like mine being a bit on the hips. So work out how much you want it with a little bit of a seam allowance, and then cut it a little bit longer, but remember how much longer you've done it. Now we want to know on our elastic, where is the centre? So I'm marking that with chalk. The quarter bit is too, so I'm marking that with chalk. And then I know where the side seams are on my skirt and where the centre is on my skirt. So as we apply the elastic, we are matching up with the marks on the skirt. I'm laying the elastic about centimetre, half a centimetre overlap. I'm going to be stitching close to the edge of the elastic, and as I go around I have to match up these markers with the notches on my skirt. So as I'm saying, I don't pull first of all when I start, I just let it sew, and then when I get an opportunity to pull, I put my hand behind and I stretch the elastic a little bit. But you don't want to stretch it too much, because then it gathers too much, but then it looks something like that. So we're nearly at the end. Now I find that if I go backwards and forwards to close off the seam on twin needles, very often they get tangled up, so I don't bother. So I'm just going to sew right to the end, go past on the elastic, and that's it. So that's the front and that's the back. And because there's a zigzag at the back, it means that that stitch line stretches. So I'm going to go backwards and forwards quite a few times on that elastic because I don't want it to pop undone. Match up my seams, match up where I've got the leather, and then just gently work my way around that side seam, centimetre seam allowance. So when you match up the leather, remember to fold the seams the way they were when they were being pressed. So any bits hanging off the edge, you just trim them off, trim back your waistband, your elastic on the waist, and do a little snip into the V on that hem bit there. So we're doing the hem now. Now you know I like to do the hem from the right side and feel where the hem is. Well, also we've gone back to that twin needle again, sorry about that, but because we need a little bit of stretch in that hem for when we're walking, we're using twin needle. So I'm going to start at the side seam. So I'm starting at the side seam with my twin needle. I'm not going to go backwards and forwards, and I'm just going to feel where my hem is and work my way around the skirt. When you get to the end, because you're not going backwards and forwards, just go over a few stitches, you know, the line that you started before. Pretty good, eh? I am definitely trying this one on. Thank you so much for watching Stitchless TV. Share all of your Stitchless projects on my Facebook page, Stitchless Tree. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.